Come with me to the Hartwell auto auction, Saturday. Garrett Winslow stood quietly in the back, hands pocketed. His eyes were locked on a forgotten wreck at the lot's edge. Rusted fenders, missing glass, total junk to most. 3 other bidders took one glance and just walked away. When he finally raised his paddle, the entire room turned. Then they laughed. Caulfield didn't even lower his voice. What's he doing with that junk pile? Growing tomatoes inside. Up at the podium, Sloane Merritt stared down at Garrett. She wasn't laughing at all. She dropped the heavy gavel. Fools judge by the surface. 30 days later, that exact barn find stood on the same block, and nobody was laughing. 2 days earlier, Garrett sat at his kitchen table. That was when the Hartwell Classic Car Catalog hit his inbox. He nearly trashed it unseen. He tracked a dozen regional auction houses and estate sales. Usually he'd just skim the shiny cars on page 1 and move along. But a gut feeling made him click. He scrolled straight to the final lot. The picture was awful, shot in terrible light, total wreck. But Garrett put down his mug, zooming in on his screen, looking past the decay. He focused on the bottom left, right where the rusty chassis met the rocker panel. He sat there studying those hidden details for ages. Moving to his desk, he printed the picture out. He sat with it directly under a bright lamp. The drill patterns, the spacing, the heavy reinforcement spots along the steel frame rail. Those weren't standard factory choices. You and I know true treasure hides in the details. Those hand-built choices meant this vehicle was pushed way past normal limits. Garrett had spotted that exact layout on just 6 vehicles ever, all 6 rolled out of one legendary custom shop. He quickly called his neighbor, Mrs. Dillard, asking her to watch his son Miles on Saturday night. Next morning, he drove the boy to Clover Hill Elementary inside his own beat-up truck with a cracked dash. Miles chewed a granola bar in the back seat. "Where are you headed today?" the kid asked. "Auto auction, going to check out a vehicle." "Is it an ugly car or a good one?" Garrett paused, smiling both. Miles chewed on that with the quiet gravity of an 11-year-old raised around grease and garage tools. "Those are usually the most interesting ones," the boy said. He hopped out at the school curb, never looking back. The morning preview window at Hartwell ran from 9 until 11. Garrett showed up at 9:15, pacing the showroom floor. 14 auction lots total, 3 bikes, retro signs, and polished beauties like a pristine '64 Galaxy. Then lot 14, the rusted Castaway. He circled the rusted shell once. Dropping to a crouch, he clicked his flashlight on. He dragged the bright beam across the filthy undercarriage. The original chassis number was mostly ground away, not maliciously. Looked like someone tried erasing its history decades back. Garrett could easily guess why they bothered. But 3 faint characters survived at the tail end of the sequence, barely peeking through the decay. He read those numbers twice. Then he finally stood, killed the flashlight, and wiped his greasy hands on his jeans. Right then, Caulfield strolled past him. Chatting with a silver-haired guy Garrett recognized from the local classic car club. He had that relaxed, careless posture of old, easy money. Derek gave Garrett a look, checked out the junker, and whispered a joke that made both rich men smirk. Garrett never even bothered turning around. Sloane Merritt reviewed her sheets. "You and I know better. You and I know true worth hides in plain sight." She almost entirely missed the man crouching beside lot 14 with a flashlight. Almost, she scribbled a quick mark on her bidder sheet, Winslow G, registration 47. Then she returned to her notes, completely unaware of the hidden treasure sitting right there. When lot 14 rolled up, the opening bid was so embarrassingly low it felt insulting. Sloane called the miserable number twice before a solitary hand finally rose in the back. Garrett held his paddle perfectly steady. The entire room turned. Dead silence, followed by cruel laughter spreading through the crowd. Caulfield's mocking voice cut through perfectly. "What's he going to do with that pile? Grow tomatoes?" Sloane stared at Garrett. He was simply studying that battered, rusted shell. Nobody else bid on the Castaway. She brought the wooden gavel down. The dismissive crowd was already moving on as Garrett stepped up to sign his receipt. Their eyes locked, hers quietly judging the purchase, his revealing absolutely nothing. She simply looked down at her paperwork and recorded his bidder number in the column. The next morning, Garrett hauled his prize home on a flatbed, backing it into the dark garage at Millhaven Auto and Body. He had been running his struggling shop out of a dusty Elm Street shed for 4 years. Mostly just him alone. Occasionally pulling in part-timers whenever a rare vintage car restoration demanded extra hands. Like the discarded car, the shop looked rough. The weathered exterior sign was pure guesswork. Ray Okafor leaned against the exterior wall as Garrett arrived, gripping a coffee mug, quietly watching the sleepy street. 4 years of silence between them ending today, not since that awful December his wife died. Back then, Ray had offered comforting words, but a grieving Garrett barely heard a thing. Now Ray just watched the flatbed swing wide, staying silent until the forgotten relic touched ground. "You found it," he said quietly. "Didn't find it? Bought it." Ray placed his mug on a block and crouched by the rusty, unloved chassis frame. Garrett watched the older man's face go totally still, a blank mask he always wore when analyzing a piece of history. Then Ray zeroed in on the partial chassis code. 3 tiny characters buried under rust. He stayed completely quiet for 10 seconds. "You know what this is," he said. It really wasn't a question. "I had a strong suspicion from the catalog photo, the drilling pattern on the rocker panel." Ray stood up slowly. There were only 5 of them. Internal prototype program, 1971 Dodge Challenger RT, purpose-built for track development. Never publicly registered anywhere, never sold through standard dealer channels. Callaway ran the secret program, restructuring back in 2009. After that happened, all 5 cars were supposed to be totally accounted for. He paused. "This one apparently wasn't, I know. If you verify provenance, legitimate auction house, independent inspection, you're looking at $380,000 to $500,000. "I know that too." Ray stared closely at him. "And exactly how much did you pay?" Garrett told him the pathetic price. Ray made a sound that wasn't exactly laughing. "Stick with me." Ray knew its true worth because he personally stamped those exact codes. Lead technical advisor for the Callaway prototype program in 1971. He had built that secret registry himself, 38 years ago. There were secrets he couldn't share officially. A non-disclosure agreement signed during the Callaway restructure still had serious teeth. But what he could do was stand there, letting you and me watch Garrett's brilliant discovery confirm itself. 9 years is a long time to be away from this dusty work, Ray said. 4 years. You left Callaway in 2014. I walked away because Alan got her diagnosis. I came back to Millhaven. She died 2 years later. Garrett grabbed a rag to wipe his hands, even though they were still perfectly clean. Been fixing cars this whole time, you know how it is, and Garrett absolutely did. He laid a hand flat on that rusted roof, no big dramatic gesture, just a quiet palm resting on the cold metal, standing entirely still for a long second. What he felt right then wasn't mere sentiment or foolish pride. It was closer to quiet, undeniable recognition. You and I know he stood before a battered machine the world had written off. But he saw the hidden treasure buried inside, and he planned to spend the next 30 days proving its worth. That afternoon, Sloan phoned the auction accounting desk to verify the payment on Lot 14. Standard routine, she handled 3 more calls right after. Then she leaned back and stared at the lot sheet for bidder 47. She opened a fresh browser tab and searched for Garrett Winslow, Millhaven, Ohio. Auto repair shop on Elm Street, website built back in 2015. Bare bones, a few photos, a contact form, and reviews praising his honest expert work. That was it. She closed the tab but left the browser window open. Back at the shop, Garrett grabbed the wall calendar and started counting the squares. 30 days. He hung it back up, walked to the far corner, and started drafting a list. 30 days was just enough, assuming he barely slept. The first week was pure, brutal demolition. Picture it, every panel stripped, lines cut, the interior torn down to bare metal. Garrett grinded from 6 in the morning until well past midnight, eating cold meals right at his workbench. He juggled calls with classic car part suppliers across Kentucky, Tennessee, and Michigan between repairs. He scribbled part numbers inside an empty pizza box and taped it up on the wall. He bought rare chrome trim from a Nashville dealer who kept it boxed in storage, completely blind to the true treasure he held. He found the exact vintage carburetor on a forum. Drove out to Dayton on a Wednesday night to grab it, hauling it home in pitch black. His kid Miles hung around the garage after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He would dump his backpack behind the counter, spin the desk chair once, and dig out his homework. The kid stayed pretty quiet while he studied, a trait he definitely inherited straight from his dad. But after 20 minutes or so, he would finally speak up. "What color are you painting it?" Garrett lay under the chassis, not even looking up. "Original color." "What is original?" Garrett slid out and faced his son, "Plum crazy purple." Miles scrunched his face like he ate a lemon. "That is a real color?" "Straight from the factory." "That's the absolute worst name for a color I've ever heard." "Dodge named it." "Dodge was wrong." Garrett chuckled. The sound caught him totally off guard, just how remarkably easy it felt. He slid back under the vehicle. On the 7th day, a car pulled up out front. Sloane Merritt stepped inside, holding a clipboard and a calculated look. Garrett simply pushed the bay door wider. "Come in." He didn't ask why she was there. She explained the auction policy. Hartwell liked tracking the final condition and fate of specialty vehicle lots. It informed their pricing models. She claimed she always checked in early, using a perfectly rehearsed tone that made it sound like standard follow-up procedure for every single buyer. Which was definitely a lie, and both of them saw right through it. "Look closely with me. It was stripped to the bone. No wheels, seats, or glass. Just raw value. You and I know true worth hides." Sloane kept her look purely professional. Garrett walked her through the rusted pieces he was saving and discarding. He spoke with the rushed, precise tone of a man who sees the masterpiece beneath the grime and doesn't need validation. Yet he explained his neglected treasure anyway, just being polite. She watched him cradle the rusted steering column like fragile glass, as if it held the car's soul. Right then she realized he wasn't guessing. He knew the immense worth hidden inside this wreck. He was studying an old story he already knew by heart. "Any plans to resell this after the restoration?" she probed. "Our auction house could list it." "Not sure." She jotted it down. It wasn't the direct answer she expected, but it confirmed the hidden value she suspected was there. That quiet realization unsettled her perfectly ordered world. Walking away, she cast one final glance. He was already back to work on his masterpiece, backlit by the bright garage bulbs. She flipped her clipboard and scribbled. "Buyer holds highly specialized knowledge. Do not underestimate follow-up." She underlined that last word twice. Then she just stared at the page, shocked that a supposed junk buyer possessed such undeniable expertise. By day 10, rumors reached Derek Caulfield, drifting through the luxury auto club's shallow, status-obsessed gossip mill, the exact way idle chatter spreads through small towns. Someone drove past that humble little garage on Elm. They heard noises and casually whispered about it over dinner. That poor single father was apparently turning that absolute eyesore into gold. "You and I know arrogance is blind." Derek simply laughed, then dispatched a thug named Holt. Holt strutted in Thursday morning, holding a flashy Caulfield Motors card and a slick, rehearsed pitch about eager private buyers. Garrett stood working at the back of his dusty shop, heard the entrance chime, and stepped forward, wiping grease off his hands. "Not for sale," Garrett stated before Holt even finished talking. Holt pushed hard about fair market value, saving him another auction house hassle and dropping quick, cold cash right on the table. But the whole time his greedy eyes stayed glued to the back. The forgotten treasure sat under a gray tarp, completely hiding its worth. Garrett firmly blocked the slick salesman from his hidden gem. "Not for sale," he repeated quietly. Defeated, Holt left. Garrett watched the fancy car cruise down Elm and completely vanish from sight. That evening, Derek directly called Sloane. He only had her sell because she'd foolishly given it to the arrogant dealer years ago, back when his wealth intimidated her, and she hadn't yet learned how to establish firm professional limits. He spoke in that deceptively friendly tone rich men use when they expect to take whatever they want. He demanded exclusive technical specs from her private auction lot file, past vehicle identification records, or any rare documentation the seller disclosed. Sloane stood her ground, saying that internal data remained strictly confidential. Derek threatened her, boasting he spent nearly $400,000 annually at her vintage auto auctions. Unfazed by the shiny price tag, Sloane calmly said she had answered him. Then she ended the call. "You and I know money doesn't buy character." She sat perfectly still. She hadn't warned the devoted father about Derek's initial snooping. She genuinely didn't know if she should interfere or how she would even explain the rich man's greed. She opened the bidder records and quietly saved the humble mechanic's garage number into her phone, simply entering his name as Winslow Lot 47. By day 18, she returned to that unassuming garage. No corporate clipboard this time around. She parked her car on Elm, stepped inside, and lied that she was simply passing by. He simply looked at her. Then he stared down the dead-end street, past his driveway, toward a rusted chain-link fence 200 yards away. He looked back at her. Without a single word, he opened the garage door wider. Let's look past the surface together. The car sat gutted, just bare metal and unfinished structural work. Garrett was quietly fitting a small component onto the raw engine block. Working both hands in that cramped, greasy space, he finally spoke without looking up. "Hold this." Sloane gently set down her bag. She stepped closer, placing both hands exactly where he pointed, holding the dirty piece steady while he wrenched the fitting. They stood like that for 3 minutes, totally silent, her hands exactly where he needed them. His rough hands working around hers, the shop echoing with nothing but the quiet clinking of metal. When he finally finished, he just said, "Thank you." Sloane didn't pick her fancy bag back up immediately. On night 22, his son Miles was at his grandmother's. The garage felt completely still, the way lonely workspaces do. Not totally silent, old buildings always breathe, but it was an emptiness the struggling dad felt deeply. He sat right on the cold concrete, leaning heavily against the rusted driver's side door. Legs stretched far out, just staring at the ceiling. He didn't look broken. He looked like a guy quietly doing some very hard math in his head, adding up everything he owed against his last savings, trying to make the impossible columns balance. Just up on the shelf above the dusty bins sat a simple photograph inside a tiny wooden frame. "You and I know real treasure hides." It sat pushed against the blocks between a manual and rusty bolts. Taken back in 2006. Ellen stood by a vehicle in her white coat, squinting into the bright Columbus sun, hand resting on the hood. It was a 1968 Trans Am Racer, the very first classic Garrett fully restored at Callaway. She had driven out on delivery day, placed her hand right on that pristine hood and told him, "You made something." She was the one who finally told him to come home. Stage 3 cancer, February 2013. He was just 2 weeks from finishing a beautiful Shelby Cobra, a vintage restoration destined to fetch $900,000 at auction. But she called him that Tuesday saying, "I don't need you over at Callaway. I need you here." He drove straight home that night. She passed away in March 2016. He never returned to Columbus. His old phone buzzed on the workbench. 10:03 p.m. A text from Sloane checking the classic car documentation. "Did you receive the secondary paperwork from the county?" He stared at the screen. Standard question. Easily could have waited until sunrise. He typed back that he had the papers, and the restoration was right on schedule. He just watched the message bubble for a long moment after sending, because she hadn't actually asked about the schedule. 3 minutes later, she replied, "I know." He flipped the phone face down on the greasy bench and ignored it until morning. On day 25, Ray came back that afternoon holding a single, folded piece of paper. He dropped it on the bench without speaking. Garrett slowly unfolded it. "This is what we've been waiting for." A November 2011 Restoration Today article on lost prototype programs from American muscle builders. The Callaway section spanned 2 pages, absolutely no photos of the individual vehicles. No mention of the forgotten engineers by name. But the technical specs. The frame drilling patterns and chassis reinforcement details. The custom tuning was mapped out clearly. You and I would recognize the hidden treasure immediately if we knew our automotive history. Ray grabbed his coffee. "I didn't bring that," he muttered, and simply walked out. Garrett read the forgotten article twice. He smoothed it across the greasy workbench, dropping a wrench on top so this priceless clue wouldn't blow away. This was his missing puzzle piece, not the absolute proof but the vital bridge. If he tied that rusted chassis to these specs, and an auction expert verified it, the world would finally see the masterpiece beneath the grime. He glanced at the calendar, 5 days left, then he stared at his phone. Sloane's name was still glowing on the screen from yesterday. He didn't call her, but he didn't pocket the phone either. Day 27, Sloane walked into her quiet office at 7:40. She found an email waiting, quietly delivered at 11 o'clock the night before. No sender name, no subject, just one attachment containing an 8-page scanned document. The header read Callaway Motorsport Heritage Internal Vehicle Registry Restricted, dated January 2009. She studied it closely, 5 hidden chassis numbers fully listed. Beside each one sat the build dates, specs, and programs. The 5th abandoned vehicle had 3 digits at the end of its chassis code that she instantly recognized from the rusted heap. She forwarded the file to Hartwell's tech desk, asking them to trace the mysterious sender. The answer arrived later that afternoon. A public terminal at the Columbus Metropolitan Library's North Side branch. She sat silently, letting the hidden truth settle. Then she pulled the junkyard car's original file, spotting a name tucked in the copy field of the leaked document's routing header. Ray Okafor, lead technical advisor. She immediately dialed the contact number she found. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Okafor, this is Sloan Merritt calling from Hartwell Auction House in Millhaven. I got a very interesting document today." A heavy pause followed. "I didn't send you a thing. I know. I've been barred from making certain disclosures. Have been for 16 years, I understand." Another long pause. "You really should ask Garrett about 2006 through 2014. His tone stayed deadpan and professional, like he was simply reading directions off a map. "That's all I'll say," and the line went dead. "Stick with me here." Sloan drove to the forgotten garage that afternoon, laptop bagged over her shoulder, zero planned explanations. Garrett was standing by the greasy workbench when she entered. She dropped the laptop on a clean corner, flipped it open, spun the screen right to him, and kept her mouth shut. He stared at the glowing document for a long time. Then his eyes met hers, not glancing past, not looking away. He looked right at her, finally dropping the rusted guard he'd held through every past visit. "You need an official confirmation?" he asked quietly. "I need to understand what I'm seeing." "You're looking at exactly why I bought that junked car," he replied. "Not the full story, just the raw rusted skeleton. 15 years at Callaway, over 60 restored vehicles, and Barrett Jackson auction prices so high they made deep-pocketed car collectors go dead silent in their seats." He explained walking away in 2014 and exactly why. He finally told her about Ellen. "You and I know real truth doesn't always shine." He spoke without theatrical grief, just a man carrying a heavy, rusted burden. He spoke quietly, justifying choices that seemed crazy until you saw the hidden worth beneath the surface. Sloan simply listened. Finding hidden value required patience. Her real skill was finding the truth buried beneath the surface, and tonight she clearly heard both. When he finished talking, she studied the discarded machine. The resurrected body panels were mounted. Fresh paint was being applied in careful stages. She never imagined how plum-crazy purple would transform a rusty shell, realizing her initial doubts were completely misplaced. It wasn't tacky. Under those shop lights it flowed like deep liquid, a stunning color hiding secrets that shifted with your viewing angle. "What happens to this hidden treasure when you finish it?" she asked softly. "Put it back where it belongs." She wondered if he meant a classic auto auction or something deeper. She stayed quiet. Leaving the shop, she lingered by the garage door, struck by what others had almost thrown away. The light inside glowed warm. She heard him working within, tools clinking gently, heavy footsteps against the concrete floor. Standing in that cold October parking lot, she realized something you and I often forget about hidden worth. She was truly seeing the magic, not just calculating auction angles. Just appreciating the beauty of a forgotten relic, like she used to before the industry jaded her. She drove home in the dark, unsure how to handle that pure feeling. By the 29th evening, the forgotten junker was fully reborn. Garrett leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, taking in his incredible hidden treasure. All 4 tires grounded, the flawless paint glowing deep and rich beneath the shop lights. The exact, authentic chrome trim, carefully tracked down and verified, gleamed brightly under the ceiling bulbs. The vintage interior restored to perfection, right down to the authentic seat fabric and proper dash bezels. Anyone glancing at the surface would just see a beautifully restored Challenger, nothing more than metal. But if you knew its forgotten history, you'd realize you were staring at pure automotive gold. Ray was there too. He had brought sandwiches earlier and just stayed put. He perched on a shop stool, staring in awe at the once abandoned machine. "Are you revealing its legendary provenance at the auction block?" "If Sloan proves its hidden heritage through Hartwell, absolutely." Otherwise, I sell it as a basic restoration, taking whatever cash I can to fix my own roof. You didn't resurrect this for the payout. No. Garrett glanced at his watch. But my kid needs shoes. Ray let out a genuine hearty laugh at that. Garrett grinned back. At 9 that night, Sloane phoned. She had spent all week unearthing its value, verifying anonymous documents and old automotive trade articles. An independent inspection by a trusted Cincinnati specialist proved the rusty shell held real magic. The provenance file wasn't absolutely flawless, but the hidden history was completely legitimate. A forgotten heritage backed by physical proof and partial paperwork. Fully disclosed in the auction listing. Not Sotheby's level but Hartwell standard, hiding absolutely nothing anymore. Garrett absorbed this. Is Derek going to cause trouble for you? A heavy silence. The first time he looked past the precious car to ask about her own well-being. Probably, she sighed. That is my burden. An hour later a sharp knock hit the garage door. Stick with me here. Garrett opened up, finding Derek Caulfield wearing a sharp blazer. A man who polished his outside appearance to hide the deceptive things he did in secret. Derek stared at the masterpiece. You and I know true treasure hides. His face shifted rapidly, settling on pure, unadulterated want. Plain, naked desire. He immediately offered $120,000. Cold cash tonight, hoping to bypass the classic car auction entirely. Garrett refused. Derek pushed higher, trying to rationalize buying this once discarded prize. No fees, clean, easy deal. He sounded completely reasonable and dangerously persuasive. The man knew how to buy cheap. Garrett replied, You waited 30 days to ask. I spent 30 days building my answer. He backed up and shut the garage door. Then he just stood there in silence. From a cheap corner cot, since Miles's grandmother had plans and the boy needed a bed, came a tiny, sleepy voice. Dad, Garrett gently walked over. His little boy sat up, clutching a warm blanket. He stared at the restored machine with that heavy, drowsy focus of a kid waking up to something special. That's the car, Miles whispered. That's it. It's a really weird color. The kid stared past the surface, but it's a good car. Garrett crouched down by the little cot, resting a warm hand on his son's shoulder. Miles leaned in, drifting off within 30 seconds. Garrett stayed frozen there for a long time. Later, in the absolute quiet, he approached this reborn treasure, opened the driver door and sat. The worn seat felt perfect. That steering wheel sat exactly where it belonged. Gripping the wheel, he stared out through the glass, past the garage, into the dark, empty street. He never started the engine, he just soaked it in. Saturday morning arrived. Let's step inside the Hartwell auction house. Today it was packed like never before. Nearly standing room only. The massive parking lot overflowed with out-of-town plates. People hunting for hidden automotive gold. Millhaven regional buyers crowded the floor, their bidding paddles already gripped tight. Whispering together, knowing a discarded junker might actually be a priceless piece of history. Sloane had posted the classic car 3 days prior, paired with an extensive write-up, hinting at extreme rarity, a prototype from a known 1971 program. Still unverified by the factory. Backed by an independent check and partial records, meeting Hartwell's strict buyer transparency rules. She uploaded crystal-clear photos and the entire mechanical report. That old trade magazine page, plus notes proving the hidden chassis codes matched perfectly. That former rusty shell had more solid proof than most pristine lots in there. Derek Caulfield desperately called her office twice that same week. She ignored both calls. The revived Challenger finally hit the stage at 10:47. The entire room fell silent, not just the polite hush between random auction lots. A heavy, awestruck silence, the kind you hear when a forgotten relic reveals its undeniable glory. Dazzling purple beneath the bright lights, flawless chrome, looking incredibly low, wide, and planted. A few front-row bidders unconsciously got right out of their seats. Sloane asked for $95,000 to start. 4 eager paddles shot up instantly. 4 minutes in, bids hit $240,000 and thinned out. At the 7-minute mark, only Derek and another classic buyer remained. An unknown private collector from Cincinnati, a face Sloane had completely never seen before. You and I can see it now, 2 men fighting for a once discarded treasure. 310, 340. Derek raised his paddle, freezing at 355. Sloane silently watched the breathless room. You and I know true worth hides. She found Garrett lingering, completely unchanged. back row, hands tucked away, staring at that rust relic, 0 bids from him. He'd handed the forgotten machine over to Hartwell days ago, letting the hidden history speak. He just watched it happen. Cincinnati raised a paddle, 360,000. Derek stared at his paddle, then the ugly duckling on stage, and finally surrendered. Sloan let the silence hang, 360,000 going once, a pause. Going twice, the wealthy crowd sat completely frozen, the heavy wooden gavel slammed. Applause erupted, scattered at first, then rolling through the stunned auction hall. Derek pushed out of his plush chair, heading straight for the doors in absolute silence. No rushing, no pausing, the high rollers simply watched him walk away. Sloan scribbled that massive final figure onto her paperwork and swiftly signed the sheet. Glancing up, she caught Garrett staring straight back through the crowd. No triumphant grin. Just the calm gaze of a father who let a rusted piece of junk do all his talking for him. She held that quiet eye contact for a beat, then returned to her desk. She felt a sudden shift in the air, even if she couldn't pinpoint exactly why. The crowd slowly cleared out over the next half hour. Garrett finalized the settlement paperwork, deducting the auction house cut from the massive payout. 306 grand. Dropping straight into a worn-out bank account that had barely survived for 4 years. Standing in that quiet corridor staring at his family's salvation, he exhaled a long, heavy breath. But the cash wasn't what truly moved him. You and I know it was the proof. Knowing the classic car treasure he spotted beneath the rust 3 weeks ago was actually real. Recognizing that inner worth mattered, and all that grease-stained effort had actually paid off. Derek suddenly marched down the hall. He paused right in front of Garrett. The usual arrogant hostility was totally gone. That sharp, mocking edge from their past meetings had completely melted away today. He stared like a guy who judged a book by its cover and lost the entire library. You knew the true value all along, Derek muttered. Yes, Derek studied his face. He peered down the empty corridor toward the silent auction stage, then turned back. I stared at that exact same catalog, he admitted, same rusty photo. His face softened, not quite full respect yet, but the quiet realization that leads there. I missed the treasure underneath. Most people do. Derek locked eyes with him tightly. He gave one slow nod, a bitter surrender to a hidden truth he'd completely overlooked. He kept walking without shaking hands. At least his wounded pride was brutally honest. Minutes later, Sloan found Garrett by the exit, gripping a thick envelope filled with his settlement summary and final closeout documents. She passed the final paperwork over, and he quietly accepted. You hid your past with Calloway when I first asked about that rusty shell, she noted. You didn't ask, I searched your name, I know, she paused. When did you realize? He answered without blinking. The very first time you stepped into my messy garage. You asked about the valve train setup inside a rare prototype spec motor. Nobody asks that unless they've already dug beneath the surface. She just stared. It was a very specific, quiet kind of realization. The look of an expert, used to judging the cover, meeting a father who had memorized the whole neglected book. She assumed she held the upper hand. Here's what you and I can learn. She did her homework, but he saw right past her mask instantly. She usually had all the answers. Right now, she was totally speechless. The main doors flew open. Miles rushed inside, half running with his grandmother trailing closely behind him, still wearing her heavy winter coat. The boy made a beeline for his dad. How much, he asked. Enough for new shoes. Miles squinted in doubt. Just shoes and maybe painting the old garage. The boy weighed this out, finally deciding it seemed fair. Then he studied Sloan. It was the pure, unfiltered judgment of an 11-year-old who only sees the simple truth right in front of him. You are the one who sold my dad's car, he stated. I just held the gavel, she replied. Miles pondered this deeply. That is actually more important. Garrett looked at her. His tough exterior finally cracked, revealing a genuine, unguarded smile beneath it. 2 weeks passed. Picture this with me. The dusty Elm Street garage held a completely different vehicle. A '68 Mustang desperately needing a complete inside restoration job. Simple, honest, everyday repair work. A job for a retired teacher who drove this beaten-up ride for 20 years, hoping Garrett could dig out enough life for 20 more. Garrett was working underneath it when Ray's truck rolled into the dirt lot. Ray strolled in, taking a seat on the shop stool completely uninvited, exactly how he always made himself comfortable around here. Calloway reached out, he announced. Garrett slid out from beneath the rusty chassis and just stared up at the ceiling. They tracked down the sale, Ray added. Nobody is pressing charges. The title history is spotless for 30 years, so there's no legal claim. Still, they want to chat. They are asking if you might want to return to work for them somehow. He hesitated, maybe consulting or perhaps something much bigger. Garrett studied the Mustang's worn undercarriage for a brief second, then slowly sat up. What did you say? I told them I would pass the message along. Ray stayed silent. Ray knew how to let silence linger. It was a skill honed from years of handling rough men who discovered their best thoughts when left unpressured. You and I know true value rarely announces itself. Garrett just heard another car pull up outside. It was not Ray's rumbling old truck. A door shut, followed by footsteps echoing on the hard concrete. He recognized that sound instantly. Sloane strolled in without knocking. Apparently, she had officially abandoned that old formality. Empty hands, no shiny clipboard, no fancy designer bag, absolutely no polished professional armor whatsoever. She stood directly in the center. Wearing her coat, she gazed down at Garrett, who sat beside the shell of the Mustang. Calloway phoned the main office, she said, checking if the car's hidden history was authentic for their files. I know. He stood up slowly. Ray just mentioned they were wondering if you wanted your old job. She studied him, looking past the grease. They asked me. Garrett fell completely silent. They asked you. Well, they called whoever understood your true worth right now. A brief, heavy pause quietly followed. No idea why I admitted that. The dusty garage fell completely silent again. You and I can see it wasn't some bitter standoff. It was the deep stillness of two souls recognizing the same hidden truth. Finding the exact same precious realization at almost the exact same second, which is something else entirely. Want to see what else I dragged in? Garrett asked. It was not some smooth romantic line. It was the raw hope of a discarded man, desperate to offer something worth staying for. Sloane admired the rusted Mustang, 68 interiors. What kind of fabric did they use? Are you asking because you care about the car, or because you want to stay? She looked deep into his eyes both. Garrett finally stood tall. He offered his calloused hand, not a formal handshake, just a quiet guide. The kind of invitation that pulls you deeper into a dismissed, abandoned space. Sloane placed her hand in his. Together they walked past neglected junk toward the back of the open garage. Late afternoon Ohio sun angled low, piercing the October dust like a luxury auction spotlight. It cast massive shadows across the cracked concrete, revealing a hidden stature far bigger than themselves. You and I know they weren't expecting hidden automotive treasure. But true value always waits exactly where others throw things away.